unabashed,
the most unpredictable,
becomes a headline,
the most volatile,
outrageous behavior,
unsubstantiated narratives,
a battle of personalities.
Welcome to Grand Tamasha. I'm your host, Milan of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. The first phase of Indian elections begins on April 11th, a little more than a week from now. Joining me to discuss the latest political developments in India is Roshan Kishore, data and political economy editor at the Hindustan Times. Roshan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you, Milan.
So just today, literally hours before we're taping this, the Congress Party unveiled its 2019 general election manifesto. I know that you and I and so many other people are still poring over the details. Could you just share with us your sort of top-line summary of what's inside?
Well, to be sure, some of the things which are there in the manifesto are not exactly new because the Congress president has been speaking about stuff which will be there in the manifesto. For example, the biggest core promise the Congress has made, which is the minimum guarantee scheme, which we talk about in detail sometime later, has already been promised a couple of months ago. Then there are other stuff such as cities would have elected mayors, then the abolition of the Niti Aayog and all that. But if you ask me for a one-line thing, the Congress manifesto for the 2019 has a very strong social democratic imprint. It talks about catering to all sections of the society with a huge increase in social spending, health, education. It talks about taking everybody along. It talks about exploiting India's soft power and all that. This is not something the Congress has done in a long time. I think they are essentially looking to capture the social democratic space.
So let's just focus in on one element of the campaign manifesto, which is the massive new minimum income support scheme that Congress President Rahul Gandhi unveiled and said the party would implement if it came to power. So in contrast to the Modi government's PM Kisan scheme, which transfers 6,000 rupees to small farmers over 1 year, the Congress scheme would transfer 72,000 rupees a year to the poorest 20% of Indian households.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us, what do we know about the flagship economic scheme as far as the 2019 elections are concerned?
So there are three things we concretely know about the scheme. The first, as you said, is the money, which would be 72,000 rupees per year, 6,000 rupees monthly. The second, which we know, is that the money would be transferred to the account of women. So the Congress is essentially saying that they identify 20% of the poorest households in the country, which comes to around 50 million households, and the money would be directly transferred to their accounts. The second thing is, and this is important, and the chairman of the Congress Data Analytics Department has gone on record to say that to implement this scheme, the 11 core subsidies would not be compromised. This includes things such as fertilizer, petroleum, food, etc., which, as you understand, is a very important thing in the Indian political economy scenario. The third thing which we know is that this money, So what we know is 17,000 rupees per year to be transferred into the account of women, and core subsidies will not be touched. I think it is also extremely important that we list what we do not know. First, what we do not know is the Congress has dropped hints that the burden of the scheme, the fiscal burden of the scheme, will have to be shared by the center and the states. Now, what exactly will be the formula of the burden sharing, we do not know. The second thing, a lot has been said about how the government would go around targeting the scheme. That, I think, is more a matter of design when the government comes to power. But what we do not know is, Milan, you would know better than anybody else, that in India, there's a lot of regional divergence in economic well-being. For example, states such as Bihar and Uttar Pradesh could have a far greater population of poorest 20% households in the country than, say, the southern states or the western states. So what we do not know is the government were to identify 20% poorest households who would be the potential beneficiaries of such a scheme across states. The third thing, and I think this is extremely important, is what we do not know is that if such a scheme were to be implemented, and imagine 72,000 rupees per year in an Indian village is by no means an insignificant amount. Like you said, the Prime Minister and the Bharatiya Janata Party government thought that they could do a lot of political exploitation by just giving 6,000 rupees per year. So if the poorest were to get this kind of money, how this changes the fundamental political economic structure in Indian villages and even cities is something we have absolutely no idea about. Remember, there was a lot of talk about even the NDNRE leading to obese inflation and that kind of stuff. So if this kind of this magnitude of spending were to be given directly to people's accounts, we have absolutely no idea what the potential impacts could be. They could be good and they could be bad.
Now, I know in some ways this is an impossible question to answer, but how do you think that this is going to play out on the campaign trail? I mean, will voters dismiss this as just another election jumla or gimmick, or do you think that the Congress scheme actually has the capacity to neutralize the BJP's own income scheme and their larger economic narrative?
Well, there are two questions here, Milan. One, I think, you will know that a lot of research in India has been done about how voters respond to poll promises just on the eve of election. And the evidence at best is mixed. I mean, it's extremely difficult to say as to how voters would react. But the other thing I think, as far as the capability of the Congress organization today is concerned, if this were the Congress organization of 2014 which were making this promise, I would be extremely skeptical about its ability to even take the message across. But I think the Congress organization today is slightly better equipped to be able to do this, thanks again to the investment the party has made in the data analytics department. I mean, it has been reported widely in India that the Congress now maintains a widespread database of activists and workers and things, and it sort of coordinates with them on a day-to-day basis. A two-way thing. Party also, if it has to disseminate an information, it does that. It also seeks feedback from the workers. I'll only tell you what is, one anecdotal example. It was reported a lot before the Chhattisgarh election. The Congress is an increase in procurement of paddy procurement prices in the state, and it is said that the farmers actually took back their produce from the local market and waited for the election results to happen. So one has to be cautious in deciding as to whether the Congress will be able to do this or not. The third thing, Milan, is this kind of a promise, when you say we identify 20% poorest households and give them a significantly large amount of money, now one has to keep in mind that nobody knows who those 20% households are. And, the kind of poverty and inequality India has, it is eminently possible that the potential beneficiaries of such a scheme, at least when voters think about themselves being potential beneficiaries of such a scheme, the number could turn out to be much higher. You might have a situation where, say, 40 to 45% of voters in each state or each constituency actually think that they could gain from this scheme. But if that happens and the sort of Congress is able to take this message across, who knows? One could see a big effect of this on the election. But like I said, all of this is in the realm of uncertainty right now.
So I want to switch gears to talk about Rahul Gandhi's decision to contest the Lok Sabha elections from the Wayanad constituency in Kerala. You wrote about this in a recent Hindustan Times piece, and I just want to quote what you said. You said, quote, "The Congress's decision to field Rahul Gandhi in Kerala is a clear snub to the all India leadership of the CPIM, the Communist Party of India Marxist, especially its General Secretary Sitaram Yechuri. Why is this move a snub, and how does it reconfigure alliance politics?"
When we were discussing the Congress manifesto, I said that the Congress manifesto is trying to capture the social democratic space in the country. Now, in India, that space has historically been with the left party. Some of the demands, such as increasing spending on health and education, etc., these are demands which have been historically raised by left party. I think today the Congress is acting very shrewdly to further weaken the left, which is already at its weakest ever in the country, and capture that space. As far as the specifics of the Congress president's decision to contest from Wayanad is concerned, when Sitaram Yechuri took over as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of India Marxist, which is the largest communist party in India, I mean, there was a clear pro-Congress tilt in the stance of the CPIM. It had an alliance with the Congress in the West Bengal elections against the Trinamool Congress in 2016, and the results were disastrous for the CPIM because it actually ceded its second number 2 position to the Congress in the Assembly. Now, Kerala is a state where historically, since independence, it is the left and the Congress which have been main adversaries. And even in 2004, when the left, with its highest ever strength in parliament, actually supported a Congress government from outside, it routed the Congress in Kerala to win 18 out of 20 seats. Today, with the left robbed of its earlier assured parliamentary strength from West Bengal, where it would get an average of 31 seats, out of the total 42 from the state, the CPIM is already in a weakened position. And now, once Rahul Gandhi has taken this message to the Congress party that he is no more worried about riding roughshod over the CPM or antagonizing left ranks, not just in Kerala but outside the country, it is a clear message that the Congress does not see the left as a valuable ally, either pre-poll or post-poll, which is, as you know, if we were to have a hung parliament, the post-poll maneuvers will be extremely important this time in 2019 as well. It is a clear message to the CPIA that the Congress is no more banking on the left to get sort of any sort of help. It did not have an alliance with the left in Bengal, and now it is clearly challenging the left in Kerala as well.
So, Roshan, I want to end this session like we do every week by asking you to share with our listeners, one story coming out of India that you think has not been adequately reported but that we need to pay attention to. What would be on your list?
Well, you would completely agree with me on this, Milan. The Election Commission went and told the Apex Court last week that they are not very comfortable with the way and manner in which electoral bonds have been started by the government. Now, and you have written about it extensively, we all know that electoral bonds essentially, it is a way through which anonymous political funding can be routed to political parties without any sort of transparency. And it has further vitiated what used to be an extremely non-transparent political funding system in India. Now, the tragedy is, I think, that there has been a lot of academic commentary and opinion writing about it. But as far as the news cycle is concerned, this issue, unfortunately, still does not have that kind of attraction in India.
I would say, my vote for this week is there have been a series of news reports on this issue of fake news. Just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, and the Atlantic Monthly, in which your colleague Snigdha Poonam from Hindustan Times has a piece on this subject of fake news. It is clearly an issue that for which India has become ground zero, for which the major internet companies, WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, and Google, and so on, are struggling to deal with. This is something where I think we're just witnessing the tip of the iceberg. We've seen a sea change between 2014 and 2019, and I think as we look forward, this fake news challenge, which, many of us who are sitting outside of India tend to focus on what's happening in the United States and the European Union because of Russian meddling, Chinese meddling, but actually what is happening in India through indigenous forms of disinformation is quite concerning, and I think something that our global listeners should be paying attention to. Let me ask you, who do you think had the best week in India this past week?
It has to be Amit Shah, the national president of the Bharatiya Janata Party. After the BJP denied the Lok Sabha ticket to its erstwhile patriarch Lal Krishna Advani, Amit Shah filed his nomination from Gandhinagar last week. And it was not just the BJP leadership, but the entire National Democratic Alliance leadership, including BJP's senior allies such as Ramvilas Paswan, Sukhbir Singh Badal, even the estranged Shiv Sena, all of them went to Gandhinagar. They made it a point to register their support for Amit Shah. And I think now Amit Shah is no more just another BJP leader. He's clearly the designated number 2 to Narendra Modi, and it has to be his week politically speaking.
So my vote for who had the best week in India are the scientists at the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO. They successfully tested an anti-satellite missile this past week. Unfortunately, they did not get a lot of the media credit because the Prime Minister decided to give a national address in which he touted this accomplishment of Mission Shakti, as it's called. But I think we've seen in the past several years several world-class achievements of Indian scientists. And this is perhaps the latest one. People have said, it's not that new, it's not that significant, but I do think that it puts India in a different category when it comes to their capabilities. Let's conclude by asking you, who do you think had the worst week in India?
Well, there's some overlap and disagreement. You talked about the fake news thing in India, but I think the fake news ecosystem had the worst week in India. Because if you look at today's newspapers and the news cycle from yesterday evening onwards, yesterday the complete news cycle afternoon onwards was dominated by the Facebook shutting down this, what it's called inauthenticated behavior, which is essentially fake news pages, etc. Both the Bharatiya Janata Party and the Congress the supporting pages seem to have been taken down. And I think what it has done is, it has, like you said, normally a lot of the fake news ecosystem is extremely technical and it is not very accessible to the common lay person. But the fact that Facebook is finally acting, I think, it will also send a message across within the common public, who is now, a lot of them use social media in India, that there's something wrong with the social media ecosystem. It is susceptible to sort of spreading fake news. And this will actually, I hope it makes people more vigilant. And the fact that Facebook has started acting will probably sort of force others to put their house in order also.
So my vote for worst week is actually the Election Commission of India. I think the ECI is one of the most respected agencies associated with the government of India. However, they have really struggled to enforce the model code of conduct, which is a set of norms which guides both the incumbents and challengers to ensure a level playing field. There were reports that the government of Odisha had to stop payments under its cash transfer scheme because they ran afoul of the model code of conduct, but the Central Election Commission in Delhi allowed for the BJP's cash transfers to continue, which of course is a much newer program. We've seen a number of inflammatory statements which raise both religious and sectarian enmity between groups have gone thus far unchallenged. And I think that we're getting to the point where, given the news environment, the hypocrisies or double standards in some of the election commission's judgments are being brought out, and this puts them in a very difficult spot because this is an apolitical body that's had a pretty impressive record of service to the nation. But I think that the challenge they face are quite significant. Roshan, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. Look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you so much, Milan. Thank you very much.
After a quick break, I'll be back to talk with Congress Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor on the Congress vision for 2019, the state of secularism in India, and the economic record of the Modi government. I'm really excited to have Shashi Tharoor on the podcast today. Just a note for our listeners, this podcast airs on April 3rd, but we recorded our interview with Shashi Tharoor 2 weeks ago. At the time of our recording, the Congress Party Manifesto had not yet been released. It just came out this morning. So while Shashi does not directly address the contents of the manifesto, he does speak about some of its underlying principles. As most of our listeners know, Shashi is someone who has worn many hats. He's a celebrated author and commentator. He's had a distinguished career as a diplomat at the United Nations. He's currently a member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala and chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs. His latest book is titled The Paradoxical Prime Minister, Narendra Modi and His India. He joins us today from his home state of Kerala. Over the past few weeks and months, we've heard a great deal from the opposition about, what the Modi government has fundamentally gotten wrong these past 5 years. But, if the Congress and its allies were to form the next government in May 2019, what is it that your party would like to do for the 1.3 billion citizens of India? What is the affirmative vision of the Congress Party?
Well, our manifesto is about to be released, and I can't preempt that. I wish we could talk in a couple of weeks when that happens. But I can give you a broad idea. I mean, the first and most important thing we're offering is competence. The Congress Party has a very deep bench of highly experienced, qualified people who have run government ministries and know how to deal with public policy questions, which is frankly more than the BJP can say for other than a small handful of 4 or 5 ministers. They have an embarrassingly empty talent. So that's one thing we offer is competence and experience. A second thing we offer is inclusiveness, because unlike the BJP, which became the first ruling party in the history of India to actually have a Lok Sabha, that is the lower house of parliament, without a single elected Muslim or Christian from their party, from a ruling party. There's never been an example of that until they did it. That is not what we're all about. We are a very diverse party. We look like India. We embrace every section of society, every interest, every religious and linguistic group. And that's going to be a second major thing we offer India. A third thing we do offer is a greater sense of compassion. We believe in social justice. The BJP does not. We believe that liberalization is good. The economy must grow. We must give capitalists the freedom to work efficiently and to grow the economy. But we also believe that the fruits of that growth, the revenues that come to the government, must be distributed for the welfare of those who are marginalized, excluded, oppressed in some cases, shut out of the system. I myself have argued in Parliament that while I am a believer in many ways, in many aspects of the market, the magic of the marketplace, the magic of the market will not appeal to those who can't afford to enter the marketplace. So we need to give them a leg up through government assistance to give them an opportunity to become participants in the economy and consumers eventually. And that would be a win-win for everybody, from the businesses that need more consumers to the consumers themselves who right now can't afford to consume anything. So that's That's, again, a fairly major difference with the BJP. Fourth, we actually have a track record of economic reform. They don't. We've done reforms. Manmohan Singh was considered the most reformist prime minister, and earlier than that, the most reformist finance minister that India had seen. And he continued in that vein during his 10 years in office. Mr. Modi talked a good game about reform, but has actually got no reforms to show for anything other than demonetization, which was extremely ill-conceived and badly implemented. We had a very good idea to have a nationwide goods and services tax, a GST, to replace the plethora of 23 taxes that afflicted business in our country, particularly making it difficult to have what you call in America interstate commerce because of the various checkpoints and state borders and so on. The BJP took that good idea, this wonderful sort of horse that we had, this sleek horse, and turned it into an ungainly camel with not just one rate of GST as most countries have and as we would have had, but 5 rates of GST, not counting 0 and the luxury rate. And on top of that, they ended up confusing matters further by leaving several items out of GST, such as petrol, alcohol, tobacco, communications. And all of this means that there's still now a multiplicity of taxes that confuse the heck out of everybody. And they rushed so hastily into implementing it that they actually wrecked many businesses from within. The only people who grew as a result of their GST in the economy were chartered accountants who suddenly found themselves getting contracts from companies that had never needed a professional accountant before.
So, Shashi, could I come in on this point? I mean, the argument has been made in the past that the UPA-1 government, which was in power from 2004 to 2009, really benefited from many of the major economic reforms that Prime Minister Vajpayee of the BJP enacted during his time in office between 1999 and 2004. Could you not make the case that whichever government comes to power in 2019 will benefit from some of the steps that the Modi government has taken? So whether it be on direct benefit transfers, whether it be the insolvency and bankruptcy code, whether it's on GST, however imperfect, was implemented under this government. So isn't there a case to be made that some of these things, while they have introduced short-term disruption, will lead to some real consequential medium to long-term gains?
Yes and no, Milan. The problem is we still have to fix them. So, for example, if they'd introduced the GST we tried to introduce and they had obstructed when they were in opposition, I think we'd have to applaud that because it would have simplified the tax code, would have made business much easier, and would have been relatively smoothly implemented. The mess they've created will take a long time to disentangle. We want essentially now to collapse those 5 rates into one. And then you'd have a 0 rate and a luxury rate, but you just have one GST rate, and we'll include every item in it.
But the argument
undoing.
The argument of the BJP is that you had to create a nationwide consensus of the center and the states via the GST Council. And so given the political economy of India and how complicated the federal setup is, you couldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so now the challenge is how to streamline it. Are you not sympathetic to that line of argument?
Well, I mean, in the end, we have no choice but to be, because it is the current reality, and whatever government comes to power in a couple of months' time will have to live with where we are rather than where we would ideally have liked to be. I think we were doing a very good job of selling the single rate GST back in 2011 to 13 until we were completely and unsympathetically stonewalled by the BJP and particularly by Chief Minister Narendra Modi and a couple of his fellow chief ministers from BJP-ruled states. So let's not go there because the history is so tangled and unpleasant. I can tell you that the arguments made then are the obverse of the ones the same people made when they came to power. Mr. Modi is a classic instance, one more paradox, if you like, of the golden rule that where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. He's sitting in Gujarat, he has one view. He's sitting in Delhi in the Prime Minister's office, he has another view. But that's been seen throughout. The other example, the reforms you mentioned, again, without exception, are reforms that we initiated, they blocked. That applies to the bankruptcy code, which we drafted, the FDI in retail, which was passionately opposed by the very ministers who are now touting it as a solution to everything. The Aadhaar, which we came up with as a mechanism of direct benefits transfer with reliable identities for poor people who often don't have any other identity, and which would have entitled them to claim the government benefits that they deserve to get, the government not only took our idea after opposing it right up to and including in the 2014 elections, they took the idea that they had so bitterly opposed and converted it into an incredibly intrusive Big Brother type scheme in which they actually obliged us. Anyone getting a SIM card for a mobile phone had to link it to an Aadhaar number, this ID number. You opened a private bank account, nothing involving government transfers or government benefits. You had to give your Aadhaar number. It became a way for the government to maintain surveillance over every transaction of Indian citizens. It really was quite an alarming extension to the point of, one can call it an abuse of power, until the Supreme Court weighed down heavily and pushed back on it. So I must say I'm sorry, Bill, and I think you're being very fair-minded, but also a bit too generous in giving the BJP credit for things that honestly should and could have been done differently and therefore better and with more effective results.
So let me ask you, switching gears slightly on the election in your own constituency of Thiruvananthapuram, what would you say are the top 2 or 3 issues that your constituents are most animated by this election cycle? When you're out on the campaign trail, what are your constituents raising with you as their member of parliament?
Okay, well, let me point out, just by way of background for your listeners in America, that this is untypical in 2 ways. It's untypical of India because the bulk of India is in the northern Hindi heartland states, where issues like the tensions with Pakistan loom very large, even now, and where there's still a bit of traction for a kind of khaki election that the BJP is trying to fight, fighting for votes on national security grounds and so on. In the south, the headlines have long since faded. No one mentions that incident anymore. Everyone's focused on real day-to-day issues. Terrorism, similarly, has hardly touched the south, whereas many severe incidents have affected the north. So there's a difference there, too. I would say South Indians are perhaps more concerned about the daily terror of poverty, ill health, disease, demonetization, job losses and unemployment, that kind of thing. But there's a second complication in my constituency, which is that it's also untypical of Kerala, because it's the only constituency in the whole state in which the BJP has a fighting chance. In the other constituencies, they're doomed to being rather poor, also ran third in a fight which will be dominated by the United Democratic Front led by the Congress Party and the Left Democratic Front made up of various kinds of communist parties, which may strike you all as an anomaly because there aren't too many communist parties doing very well in democracies anymore. But in Kerala, we actually have them in power in our state. And in my constituency, therefore, I'm facing a tough 3-corner fight with a resurgent BJP, which has got a governor to resign from his seat and come here and contest against me, and the Communist Party of India, which has also had a former minister who is from this constituency running against me. So it's a tough 3-cornered race in a way that is a bit untypical of elsewhere in Kerala or indeed elsewhere in the south. We've got 2 strong, quote-unquote, national parties, and a third one that's nominally national, but really is strong only in Kerala and Bengal, that is the Communist Party. Anyway, what are people concerned about? They're concerned, first of all, about the growing and alarming signs of communal bigotry being spread by the BJP, which has also taken a hold of, I believe, still a minority of the majority, that is, a minority of the Hindu population, is infected by this virus, this feeling that they need to think of themselves in terms of their religious identity, as Keralites and most Indians had not done until the BJP made it such an incendiary aspect of their political promotion. A second thing they're concerned about is basic economics. I mean, a gas cylinder that used to cost 390 rupees in UPA at its peak now costs almost 1,000 rupees. And that's because of the BJP having levied heavy taxes on gas cylinders and removed subsidies to a great extent. a liter of petrol at the pump will have a almost 20 rupee tax payable to the central government attached to it, so that while world prices of gasoline dropped around the world, in India it went up because the taxes quadrupled or even quintupled, thanks to BJP policies of finding this as a way of meeting the fiscal deficit. So these kinds of issues are what my constituents raise, in addition to which there are specific local issues. The famous temple where, by tradition, women of reproductive age have not been allowed to worship. And the Supreme Court ruled that was a violation of the Equality Clause of the Constitution, and that women should be allowed to go in and worship there, which created a major uproar amongst the believers who said that faith ought to be beyond the purview of such rulings. And this uproar was cynically exploited by the BJP, which, if it really wanted to solve the problem, could have simply passed a law with their crushing majority in Parliament, but didn't bother to even draft one. They much preferred to create bedlam in the streets and create disturbances and attack police and obstruct worshippers in order to gain themselves great headlines as stout defenders of traditional Hindu practices. And they are busy asking for votes on the back of that. I don't think that's going to work too much in any other part of Kerala, but here there is a fairly strong Hindu majority in Thiruvananthapuram, which has whose passions have been stoked up for a while. So that's something that I need to watch out for locally.
So Shashi, could I just come in?
Personality politics everywhere.
Could I come in on the economy, which is one critique of the Congress campaign nationally is that given the centrality of bread and butter issues, the ones you mentioned, the economy, jobs, crop prices, and so on, do you think it has been a mistake, in retrospect, to focus so heavily on the issue of the Rafale scam? Some people say that this is sort of a diversion from the real issues that most voters care about, and that the Rafale deal is first of all, too complicated, and second of all, too linked to foreign policy for the average voter to truly, understand and care deeply about.
Well, I can accept that critique, especially with hindsight, but let me explain the rationale for it. It's partly that the BJP successfully succeeded in casting aspersions on the ruling Congress party in the last election as an irremediably corrupt political organization, which we certainly don't believe we are, and frankly, certainly no more or no less than any other political party in this country. There is a certain level of corruption in the system, which I think you've written about, and where we many of us, someone like me who came into politics from a life outside, have found distasteful and would like to see ended. But certainly no party has a monopoly on corruption, nor does any party have a monopoly on virtue. The problem we have at the moment with the BJP's stereotyping of the Congress Party is that they've gotten away scot-free. And we felt that this enormous scam staring us in the face, which actually has national security implications too, because it has meant reducing what was intended to be a contract for 126 desperately needed fighter aircraft to a 36 aircraft deal, which has essentially also taken it away from assembly in India to manufacturing in France and other issues. So there's something here that reflects on the BJP's corruption as well as its crony capitalism, because the beneficiary of the offset contracts following this deal is a capitalist who traveled with Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister, to Paris when the deal was suddenly sprung on an unsuspecting nation. So for all of these reasons, I think Rahul Gandhi felt he needed to raise it. And even if you're right that for many people the issue is too complicated to grasp, it has at least neutralized this corruption thing, because if ever the BJP attempts to throw corruption at the Congress has enough to throw back at them. And so in the campaign, at least it means we can get corruption off the table and talk about real economics that affects the daily life of people. So to that degree, it's been practical politics and a sensible way of neutralizing an otherwise unpleasant issue.
So I want to talk about neutralizing another complicated issue, which is this issue of Hinduism and Hindutva, which are, of course, not synonymous, and you have written about the distinction.
Not at all.
There has been a spirited debate, in the opinion pages over the last several months about whether the Congress is engaging in quote-unquote soft Hindutva in order to blunt the BJP's advantage among Hindu voters. You have tackled the subject head-on in some of your recent writing. What would you say to those, say, liberal-minded voters of India who worry that between the two major parties, secularism in India has sort of gone by the wayside?
No, I think what we've found is that by initially opposing the Hindutva brigade with talk of secularism per se, that we were essentially handing the debate to them on a platter, because India is a deeply religious country, and they said we're the only people standing up for the Hindu faith, and these guys are godless secularists, and the godless secularists will lose every time. So instead, we decided to tackle head-on the issue that, in fact, the kind of Hindu identity politics they're preaching is antithetical to the tenets of Hinduism. Hinduism is famously, some would argue, notoriously liberal and inclusive religion, which permits all sorts of forms of worship, including various different ideas of the nature of the divine, which actually has no notion of apostasy or heresy, which does not have a single sacred book but several, has no single spiritual ecclesiastical authority like a pope or the Archbishop of Canterbury or a Grand Mufti of any sort. We are essentially an extremely capacious, accommodative religion founded on the basic concept of acceptance of difference, both within the faith and with other faiths. One of our most famous preachers, Swami Vivekananda, who spoke at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893, made a famous speech in which he said, "I'm proud to speak to you on behalf of a faith which has taught the world not just tolerance, but acceptance." And I thought that's a very profound idea, because what Hindus are saying is, look, tolerance says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in your right to be wrong. Whereas acceptance says, I believe what I believe is the truth, you believe in the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And it's on this basic civilizational principle that Hindus have survived for 4,000 years, that we remain the one civilization that, for example, gave refuge to the Jews, going back to the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians and the second temple by the Romans. And the Jews stayed on in India for a couple of thousand years without a single recorded instance of anti-Semitism until the Portuguese showed up in the 16th century to inflict it. So you've got a civilization which is absolutely open, accommodating, liberal, and now you've got a political doctrine which, in the name of the adherence of that faith, is actually driving a message that I personally consider un-Hindu, in that it is a message of bigotry, of intolerance, of reducing Hinduism, this magnificently large and spacious and almost majestic faith, into something much more like the identity team politics of the British football hooligan. And to my mind, that is unforgivable. And don't forget that the Hindutva idea, the very word itself, comes from the 1920s, when similar movements were rising in Italy with fascism, in Germany with Nazism, in Portugal and Spain and elsewhere, which were resting on the same mix of ethnic pride theory, of nativist assertion, muscular militarism, and at the same time a certain allegiance to a kind of crony capitalist culture that characterized those countries. Now that doctrine was wiped out in Europe by 1945. It remained a very fringe idea in India until suddenly from the 1980s onwards, it grew up to take monstrous proportions and today rules an entire country. So it has to be spoken against. The Congress Party disagrees with Hindutva, whether soft or hard. It is absolutely fundamentally opposed to the notion of Hindutva as a political doctrine and of the use of Hindu identity in any such way. What we do believe, however, is that we can approach this issue from a platform of inclusive Hinduism, of Hinduism as a faith in which we are actually talking about inclusiveness in a large and diverse multi-religious society. So there's a profound difference between Hinduism and Hindutva, profound difference between the Congress Party, which believes in inclusion, and the BJP, which has been pandering to bigotry.
Shashi Tharoor's latest book is titled The Paradoxical Prime Minister Narendra Modi and His India. He is the ruling Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram who is campaigning for his third term in office. Shashi, best of luck on the campaign trail, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Milan. It's a pleasure.
Grant Tamasha is a co-production of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the Hindustan Times. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to rate and review. It helps others find the show more easily. For more information about the show and to find the writing we referenced on this week's episode, visit our website, grantthemasha.com. Production assistance comes from Jamie Hinson and Rachel Osnos. Tim Martin's our audio engineer, and Lauren Duax our executive producer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.